We're traveling, you clean. That was the note Rachel left on the kitchen counter after Thanksgiving dinner. My son Tyler didn't even look at me. He just nodded and went on with his life. I stood there, the leftover turkey and mashed potatoes cooling on the stove, feeling the weight of their words settle in like a heavy stone. For the first time in my life, I was left to clean up after a family gathering, and I didn't know how to react. I had spent the entire day cooking, setting the table and decorating, hoping for a moment of togetherness, a simple family holiday. But instead I was treated like the help, like an afterthought. I had always taken care of my family, always been the one to keep the peace and make sure everyone had what they needed. But today it felt different. They barely acknowledged me as they ate, laughed and enjoyed their time together. The sound of their laughter still echoed in my ears as I stood there alone. Rachel had always been cold toward me, but today was something else. She didn't even offer to help with the dishes, let alone thank me for everything I did. It was as if I was invisible. I told myself it was just a holiday thing, that maybe I was overreacting. But the note, the way they just walked out like nothing happened, it cut deeper than I ever expected. I always thought no matter what, family was supposed to stick together. But here I was, discarded and left to clean up after them, with no explanation, no apologies. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the note. It wasn't the first time they had treated me this way, but something about this felt final, like I wasn't part of their family anymore. The pain was there, but it didn't hurt as much as it should have. Instead, there was a cold resolve settling in. I wasn't going to stand for this anymore. I'd been silent for too long, too patient. But this time I would show them. They had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up to the quiet hum of the house. The sun had barely started peeking through the curtains, and the remnants of Thanksgiving dinner sat untouched in the fridge. I could hear the faint sound of Tyler and Rachel's voices downstairs, but it wasn't the usual chatter that filled the house on a holiday morning. Felt different, emptier. I thought about what had happened the night before, the note Rachel had left, the way they'd walked out without a second thought. As I made my way to the kitchen, I noticed the dishes were still piled up in the sink, the mess from the night before untouched. It was like they didn't even care. I stood there for a moment, my fingers hovering over the dishes, unsure of what to do next. The kitchen had always been my domain, the one place where I could create something beautiful for my family. Now it felt like I was cleaning up after strangers. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window. The weight of everything was starting to sink in. I had always been the one to hold this family together, the one who made sure everyone had what they needed, but it felt like I was invisible now. It wasn't the first time they'd acted this way, but this time it was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that they had stopped seeing me as part of their family. The thought gnawed at me as I sat there sipping my coffee. I had spent so many years putting everyone else first, making sure their lives were full and happy. But now I was left in this empty house, feeling more alone than I ever had before. Tyler and Rachel had always been distant, but I never thought it would come to this. I had always hoped that no matter what, they would see me as family. But it felt like the bond we once shared had been severed, and there was no going back. The realization stung, but it also gave me a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I wasn't going to be their maid, their afterthought. I had spent my life giving everything to them, and now it was time to take back control. I wasn't sure what steps I would take yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The days that followed Thanksgiving were filled with a quiet, suffocating tension. I went about my routine, keeping my head down, cleaning the house and pretending everything was fine, even though I could feel the distance growing between me and Tyler. Rachel was hardly ever around, always busy with errands or out with friends, leaving me to pick up the pieces. It felt like I was living in a shadow, just a background figure in a life that no longer included me. I couldn't get the note out of my mind. We're traveling, you clean. Those words echoed in my head every time I picked up a dish or swept the floor. It wasn't just the note, though. It was the way Tyler had acted, the way he had looked right through me like I didn't matter. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had to change. One afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I was tired of being the silent victim in my own home. I needed to know what was going on, what had really been happening behind closed doors. The thought of confronting Tyler directly made my stomach turn, but I knew it was time. I called the bank. I needed to know what accounts were open, what money had been moved, and if there was anything I had been kept in the dark about. The more I asked, the clearer it became. There were accounts I didn't know about, money being moved around that I hadn't authorized. It was like I had been erased from my own life. My hand shook as I scribbled down the details, but I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt determination. The woman I had been, the one who quietly served and kept the peace, was gone. In her place stood someone who was ready to take back control. That evening, after a silent dinner with Tyler, I quietly slipped the documents I had gathered into my purse. Tomorrow I would find a lawyer. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but I knew it wouldn't be back to the way things were. No more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to make a decision for me. It was my turn to decide how this story would end. The next morning I woke up early, feeling a new sense of resolve. The house was quiet, just the way it had been for days now. Tyler had left for work, and Rachel was still asleep. I went about my morning routine, making coffee and trying to clear my mind. But nothing could shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something big. I had made the decision to fight back, to take control of the situation. I wasn't going to let them treat me like this anymore. As I sat down at the kitchen table, I pulled out the papers I had gathered the day before. The more I looked at the documents, the more it became clear. They had been hiding things from me, things I had a right to know. The money, the accounts, everything had been manipulated while I wasn't paying attention. I had trusted them both for years, and now I realized just how little they trusted me. A deep breath escaped my lips as I dialed the number for the lawyer I had found. I had never been one to make waves, to demand answers, but today felt different. I was tired of being the quiet one, the one who always stepped aside for the sake of peace. I needed to be heard. Hello, this is Sarah Henderson. I need to set up an appointment to discuss some legal matters, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The lawyer scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. The next steps were out of my hands now. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't go back to how things were. That afternoon, Tyler came home late, his usual distracted demeanor still in place. He didn't ask me about my day or acknowledge the fact that I had been silently planning. He just went straight to his office as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. I was no longer the silent woman behind the scenes. I was done waiting. That night I stayed up late, sitting alone in the dark, going over everything again and again in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. The next day I would go to the lawyer's office, and I would take the first step toward reclaiming my life. I wasn't going to let them steal everything from me. Not anymore. The day of the meeting with the lawyer finally arrived. I had spent the whole night thinking about what I was going to say, how I would present the evidence I had gathered, and what steps I would take next. I knew the meeting wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start, a way to take control. As I drove to the lawyer's office, the morning sun shining through the trees, I felt an odd mix of dread and determination. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving toward something. The office was on the second floor of a sleek, modern building downtown. It looked like every other office building in the city, but to me it felt like the first step toward freedom. I walked in, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The receptionist greeted me warmly and asked me to take a seat. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I refused to let myself feel nervous. I had already decided what I needed to do. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. After a few minutes, the lawyer, a woman in her late 40s with short, dark hair, appeared at the door and smiled at me. "Miss Henderson?" she asked. I nodded and followed her into her office. It was a small room with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk in the center. She motioned for me to sit, and we exchanged pleasantries before getting down to business. "How can I help you today?" she asked, folding her hands on the desk. I took a deep breath and pulled out the papers I had gathered. I need to know my rights. I've been in a marriage for over 30 years, and my son and his wife have been keeping things from me. I've discovered they've been moving money around and hiding accounts from me, and I need to know what I can do to protect myself. I laid the papers on the desk, my hands steady but my mind racing. The lawyer took a moment to look through the documents before looking back at me. "It sounds like they've been manipulating the situation," she said, her voice calm but firm. You're entitled to more than you realize, and it's time to take action. Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves, but they also fueled something deep inside me. For so long I had been the one who gave, who served, who put everyone else first. Now it was my turn to take back what was mine. The lawyer outlined the steps I needed to take, and as she spoke, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in a long time. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. I had a plan and I was going to follow through. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The days after my meeting with the lawyer were a blur. I didn't know exactly how to approach Tyler and Rachel, but I knew it couldn't wait much longer. Every moment I spent pretending everything was fine felt like I was slowly dying inside. Tyler came home late, as usual, and he barely acknowledged my presence. Rachel was still out, and I didn't expect her to be home anytime soon. I thought about the words the lawyer had told me. You're entitled to more than you realize. But it wasn't just about money. It was about respect, dignity, and the right to live my life without being manipulated or controlled. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them continue treating me like this. That evening I decided it was time to confront them. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had made up my mind. I had no more room for fear or doubt. I waited until Rachel finally came home, her heels clicking loudly as she walked into the house. I didn't get up to greet her. Instead, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, watching as she looked around, expecting to see me bustling about as usual. She didn't say anything at first, but the tension in the room was thick. "What's for dinner?" she asked, her voice casual, as though nothing had happened. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. "We need to talk." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she crossed her arms. "About what?" she asked, feigning disinterest. "About the way you and Tyler have been treating me," I said, my voice firm but calm. Rachel scoffed, the same dismissive expression I had seen 100 times before. "What are you talking about? You're being dramatic." But I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't going to let her dismiss me this time. "No, Rachel. I'm not being dramatic. I've been putting up with your behavior for too long. The way you treat me like I'm invisible. The way you and Tyler think you can control everything in this house. Those days are over." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, Rachel. I know what my rights are, and I'm not going to let you or Tyler take what's mine." Her face turned pale, her confidence faltering for the first time. "You what?" she stammered, but I didn't give her a chance to say anything else. "I'm done, Rachel. I've spent my whole life putting everyone else first, but I'm not doing that anymore. You want to treat me like I don't matter? Well, you're going to have to deal with the consequences." For the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Felt good. Felt empowering. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else push me around anymore. Tyler finally came home, and when he saw the look on Rachel's face, he knew something had changed. He tried to speak, but I just shook my head. "We're done, Tyler. I've had enough. It's time for you to figure things out on your own." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I had already made my decision. The power had shifted, and for the first time in years I was the one in control. The days that followed felt like a strange mixture of relief and dread. I had taken the first step toward standing up for myself, but I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. Tyler had been avoiding me ever since I spoke up, and Rachel had been completely silent, refusing to acknowledge what had happened. The house felt colder, emptier, as if their absence was more than just physical. It was emotional too. It wasn't until that Friday afternoon that I had the courage to follow through with my next move. I had made some calls earlier that week, gathering information, finding out what I could do to protect myself. My lawyer had been more than willing to help, but I couldn't help but feel a bit guilty, like I was tearing apart the last remnants of my family. Still, the weight of everything, the lies, the manipulation, the disrespect, had piled up for far too long. I wasn't going to let it continue. That afternoon I drove to the bank. The parking lot was almost empty, the crisp fall air biting at my skin as I made my way inside. My hands shook slightly as I walked through the glass doors, but I pushed the nerves aside. This was something I had to do. I approached the counter, greeted by a friendly teller who asked how she could help me. "I need to speak with someone about my accounts," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded and led me to a private office, where a manager was waiting. The moment he sat down, I could feel the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. I explained my situation, how I had discovered money being moved around behind my back, accounts that I hadn't known existed, and how my family had been keeping things from me. The manager listened intently, his expression softening as I spoke. When I finished, he placed his hands on the desk and looked at me. "I can help you," he said. "We can freeze the accounts and we'll get you all the information you need. You don't have to do this alone." I could feel a surge of gratitude, mixed with a growing sense of empowerment. I wasn't alone. I had someone who would stand by me, someone who would help me fight back. After the meeting, I left the bank feeling lighter than I had in days. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew I was finally taking control of my own life. That evening I returned home and sat in the kitchen, reflecting on everything that had happened. Tyler came home late again, but this time I didn't feel the weight of his silence. I had already made my decision. The power had shifted, and for the first time in years I was no longer afraid. The following week, things in the house had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Tyler was still distant, but Rachel had started acting differently. She wasn't as cold as before, but there was something forced about her politeness, as though she knew that I had found out more than I was supposed to. I had decided to keep my distance, not giving them any further insight into what I was planning. Every day felt like a delicate balance between keeping my composure and preparing for the next move. The lawyer had advised me to wait a little longer, to gather more evidence if possible, but I felt the urgency of the situation weighing on me. The last thing I wanted was for them to catch wind of my plans and destroy any chance of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. That Friday afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I heard Tyler's car pull into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't move. This was it. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. When he walked in, his usual lack of expression was still there, but it was different now. The tension between us was palpable, and I could feel his uncertainty. "Hey," he said, his voice distant. "How was your day?" I didn't look up from the papers in front of me. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat across from me, his eyes shifting nervously. "About what?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table, and finally looked him in the eye. "I'm not your maid," I said, my voice calm but firm. His face faltered for a moment, and I could see the shock in his eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. "What are you talking about?" he asked, clearly trying to play it off. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied. "The way you and Rachel have been treating me. Like I'm invisible, like I don't matter. I've been carrying this family for years, and I've had enough." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand, stopping him. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, watching as his face drained of color. "I know what I'm entitled to, and I'm not going to let you or Rachel manipulate me anymore. I'm done being your doormat." Tyler's expression shifted, from disbelief to anger. "What's gotten into you?" he asked, his voice rising. "I'm your son. I've always been there for you." I shook my head slowly. "You've always been there for me when it suited you, Tyler. But that ends today. I'm taking control of my life, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences." There was a long silence between us. I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, but I didn't flinch. I had made my choice, and now there was no turning back. He stood up, visibly frustrated, and walked toward the door, but before he left, he turned to face me one last time. "You think you can just walk away from all of this? You'll regret it," he said, his voice full of resentment. But I wasn't afraid anymore. "I won't regret it," I said, my voice steady. "I've spent too long being afraid of losing you. But not anymore." As he walked out, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own fate. The days that followed were quieter than I had imagined. Tyler's anger had faded into silence, and Rachel had kept her distance, but there was something different now. I could feel it in the way they avoided me, like they were no longer sure where they stood. As I moved through the house, I realized that the walls no longer felt like they were closing in. I had taken control of my life, and the weight of that choice had left me feeling lighter. The days felt like a slow unfolding of freedom, one that I had waited for far too long. One afternoon, as I was tending to the garden, something unexpected happened. Tyler came outside, holding a small envelope in his hand. His face, usually so unreadable, was softer now, his eyes searching mine for some kind of response. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice quieter than it had been in weeks. I stood still, waiting for him to continue. I've been thinking about everything. About what you said and about how I treated you. You were right. I've been selfish. And I'm sorry." The words caught me off guard. For so long I had been waiting for an apology like this, but now that it was here, I didn't know how to react. I had spent so much time being angry, being hurt, but in that moment I realized something. I wasn't holding on to the anger anymore. It was a relief, almost like letting go of something heavy. "Thank you, Tyler," I said softly. "I'm glad you're starting to see things differently." He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself for the next step. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to try. I want to make things right if you'll let me." His words were genuine, and for the first time in a long time I believed them. Rachel, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped forward. She looked at me, her expression uncertain. "I'm sorry too," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I know I've been distant, and I never appreciated everything you've done for us. I've been selfish too." It wasn't the grand gesture I had expected, but it was enough. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, things could change. We stood there for a long time, just looking at each other. The silence between us no longer heavy, but filled with the possibility of something new. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. A real start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone anymore.